Emergency Operation by Arthur Porges. Originally published in the May 1956 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and republished the next year in the March 1957 issue of a French science fiction magazine called Fiction. It next appeared in a 1963 anthology entitled Great Science Fiction About Doctors. Finally, it was included in a collection of the author's work in 2010 called The Ruum and Other Science Fiction Stories. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. A brief introduction from the editors of Great Science Fiction About Doctors, Groff Conklin and Noah D. Fabricant, M.D. This report of a micro-surgical exploit by a micro-surgeon is straight, serious stuff. How can any of us know what is possible and what is impossible in the universe around us? Certainly there is no reason why the human-sized brain should be the only intelligent one there is. And here we give you a vivid story of medical heroism and intelligence on an infinitesimal scale. Emergency Operation. The chief surgeon made a crisp, authoritative gesture, and the medical students straightened in their seats. On the TV screen of the auditorium, which covered an entire wall, he was an impressive figure. Tall, bony, white-haired, and intensely alive, with time-grooved lines of character on his mobile face. The laughter and conversation died away to an expectant hush. Word had gone around of an unusual case, one that was apparently luring even the senior staff members from their swank offices. As if to emphasize that point, Hoffman and Ball, two major officials of the American College of Surgeons, were walking sedately into the amphitheater to seat themselves among the fourth-year students. The chief surgeon began to speak with the slow, precisely enunciated words of a practiced lecturer. "As you know," he said, "we are confronted today with a rare but not unique medical problem. The patient on his way to the operating room right now suffered a slight abrasion of the left thumb this morning at work." He paused for a moment, presumably to organize his thoughts, but his hesitation produced an unexpected anticlimax, and many of the younger listeners snickered, taking his remark for humor. Recognizing this reaction, the surgeon frowned. "No, gentlemen," he said wryly, "I wasn't trying to be funny, however the statement sounded. The point is that this man, dealing with atomics, and rather carelessly, it would appear, rubbed the lesion and managed to contaminate the wound with a tiny particle, less than a 10,000th of a milligram, we understand, of plutonium." There was a sudden nodding of heads among the upperclassmen. "Normally," the surgeon went on, "a quick, high amputation is indicated, since such a fragment, being highly radioactive, cannot be permitted to enter the main circulatory system. That sounds radical, I know, but it's been our only recourse in the past. The deadliness of this type of isotope, with long half-life, is almost past belief. The size of the particle is irrelevant. Literally any mass of plutonium, however small, is invariably a killer inside the body. In this case, however, the patient was not sufficiently alerted to the dangers of his job, and on going off shift in the afternoon he was found to be in a dangerous condition. The plutonium had already left his extremity and lodged elsewhere, behaving," he added a little ponderously, "with the typical perverseness of such foreign bodies." He broke off, stepping aside so that they could see the large, complex operating table glide in, under automatic control on its rubberized tracks. It carried the anesthetized body of a burly, middle-aged man. Over the audio system, they could hear his faintly whistling breath, typical of the new drug, Prontocaine. More intriguing was the rhythmic purr of a pump. A 50-gallon plastic container of whole blood lay in its metal rack above the patient, and they could see the level fall slowly as the efficient little motor helped his heart drive fresh blood through the man's circulatory system. A plastic tube led from a vein in his right arm to a sump in the tiled floor. "Yes," the lecturer continued, as if sensing their reaction through the operating room's own smaller screen, which kept him in touch with his audience. "The best we can do at the moment is to keep renewing his entire blood supply. In that way, impossible with the ordinary closed circulation, we prevent the corpuscles from being repeatedly irradiated by the plutonium. The excess, which you see being drained off, will be banked and reprocessed. If you wonder why nothing more positive is being attempted at this time, the explanation is that the particle has lodged in a tiny blood vessel, a capillary, in intimate contact with the posterior part of the optic nerve, where it branches out in the brain. Now, if we had 2 hours, modern techniques of brain surgery would enable us, with every hope of success, to reach that area and remove the foreign body. But the operation is quite difficult, as you professors of anatomy will testify, and in that time, gentlemen, the damage to the optic nerve, it's the right one, and the contiguous brain tissue would be so extensive that blindness of one eye would surely result immediately, to be followed later, as so often happens, by sympathetic atrophy of the left optic nerve and total loss of sight. The brain lesions would produce less predictable symptoms, but undoubtedly serious ones. A very delicate situation indeed. Our only hope, therefore, is more rapid action of a sort especially called for in this case. A Geiger counter check has located the plutonium at the point I mentioned, and there being no other alternative, we have sent for a distinguished colleague who is uniquely competent to handle this emergency. It is while awaiting his arrival that I am able to give you this detailed summary of the problem." There was an outburst of sibilant conversation. Many now guessed what was coming. It was a fortunate medical student who witnessed a case like this one. The last in this school had occurred almost 6 years earlier, and involved a normally inoperable glioma, one of the deadliest of brain tumors. As one man, the audience stiffened. A glittering speck, like a sunlit mote, was sailing majestically across the dustless, sterile air of the operating room. They could hear a shrill, pulsing beat as of tiny engines. The glowing dot hovered momentarily, and then swooped down to alight on the stage of a TV microscope. On the auxiliary screen, which came to life immediately, the students saw the magnified image of a metal spheroid. A minute port flickered open, a ramp thrust out, and down this gangway came a microscopic organism. The size and approximate shape of a red blood corpuscle, it moved on dozens of whip-like cilia. 2 eye spots, immense in proportion to the creature's size, glowed symmetrically on each quadrant of the little disk. Lidless and bright, they were aglow with intelligence. A transparent sort of harness made a geometric pattern enclosing the saucer of protoplasm. Its webbing held numerous complex instruments. "Gentlemen," the chief surgeon boomed, "this is one of our newly trained colleagues from Ilcor, Dr. Mlo. He is about to enter the patient's bloodstream and remove the particle of plutonium." A technician came forward with a sparkling hypodermic syringe. They saw the hollow needle, a giant glittering tube under the microscope, come to rest just before the Ilcarian doctor. A lipless slit at the upper center of the disc seemed to twist in a grimace of comical distaste. One could sense a feeling like that before an unwilling plunge into chilly water. The alien organism wrestled for a moment with the tough surface film at the point of the needle, and noting this difficulty, the technician drew back the plunger a trifle. Malot was sucked through the opening, and a moment later could be seen swimming nonchalantly about in the clear tonic salt solution of the transparent syringe. The magnified image vanished from the screen, and the audience saw the technician step alongside the patient. He gave the chief surgeon a questioning glance. "Go ahead, Joel," his superior ordered, and the technician, expertly, in a single deft motion, found the great outer vein in the neck, which drains the brain itself, and drove the plunger home. "All we can do now is wait," the surgeon said. "There is no way Dr. Malot can communicate with us at present, even under ideal circumstances. A very complicated electronic setup is necessary. But while we're waiting, let me refresh your memories about our Ilkorian allies. As you may recall, it was only 30 years ago, in 1990, that the first organisms from Ilkor, a planet of Procyon, landed on Earth. Luckily, our worst period of nationalism was just over, and we made no serious blunders in our treatment of these altogether civilized beings. They're true seekers after knowledge, and before long they made enormously valuable contributions to many phases of our culture. A number of Ilkorians have devoted their best efforts to learning human anatomy and physiology, despite obstacles both in communication and size differential. This has been accomplished not only through study and consultation, but actual research within the bodies of human volunteers. Being the size of red blood corpuscles and free from bacterial infestation, they make ideal on-the-spot experts in microbiology. A few of them, all too few, unfortunately, but they are more interested in theory than practice, have made themselves available as actual medical specialists, aiding in difficult operations. They are in great demand. Dr. Malot, for example, is kept very busy, so that we were lucky to obtain his services today. He's the one, oddly enough, who, in this very room 6 years ago, entered the brain of that famous patient and destroyed in situ, with devices of his own invention, an inoperable tumor. He is an expert on radiation as well as a highly competent student of human physiology, which makes his assistance invaluable in this present emergency. By now, I hope, he is nearing the fragment of plutonium." This was, in fact, the case. Swimming rapidly through the venous bloodstream, battling its current, which, while not of arterial strength, was considerable, buffeted by corpuscles as bulky as himself, but less solid, Dr. Malot knew he was getting close. The radiation detector on his webbing had its narrow bubble quivering against the stop. He paused in the rushing flood, annoyed by brittle platelets dashing against him in great numbers. He flailed his cilia vigorously and huddled against the wall of the vessel where the blood moved more slowly. There was no light from the outside, of course, but to his ultra-sensitive eye spots every bit of living tissue gave off a faint glow. It was luminescence characteristic of life itself, although far below man's visual threshold, and known to him only through the long-neglected researches of Gurwitch. Just ahead, the vein branched, and it was necessary to take a reading. There was no time to retrace false steps. Every second the plutonium was bombarding the patient's tissues with missiles of tremendous energy and destructiveness. The left branch, no doubt of that. He studied the configuration carefully, drawing on his profound knowledge of human anatomy. Somewhere just a few inches away, There should be a smaller vein, and beyond it the very capillary nestling against the optic nerve in which the deadly fragment was wedged, stopped on its journey to the heart. Malot, however, did not jump to conclusions. No one knew better than he how great were individual differences in the microscopic structure of humans. The major organs seldom varied in their relative locations, but capillary networks were not so obliging. Here was that last vein, all right. Malot winced as a shower of nuclei battered his body. He could hear the crackling beat of atomic projectiles impinging on tissue. There was an aura of light ahead, painful to his eyes. He moved forward more slowly, almost with reluctance. What they didn't know, the doctors out there, was the personal agony of an operation like this one. To be sure, he was relatively immune to the worst effects of radioactivity, but the pain was hellish. The lancing electromagnetic rays were like summer sunlight on an inflamed conjunctiva, and a sharp-edged hail of nuclear rubbish, already disintegrated by its passage through tissue and water, pounded his tender body mercilessly. Suddenly, he stopped. A nuisance, a time-waster, especially in this narrow capillary where red corpuscles went single file. Just ahead loomed a white mass, a leukocyte, hurrying no doubt to the aid of the tortured cells and suspecting somewhere in its vague intelligence a bacterial invasion. Just in advance of Malot, it had slipped through the vessel's wall and now blocked his path. In its dim consciousness, it seemed to recognize him as an alien, with no business in the bloodstream. Although he was too big to engulf, it closed in, pseudopodia reaching for him. Malot had no desire to grapple with the thing, moist, sticky, and fetid. His eye spots were cavities of pain. His whole body cringed under that terrible, relentless rain of atomic bullets. He wanted no more complications. The leukocyte was tenacious and strong, and even though it couldn't easily hurt him, it might immobilize many of his cilia, causing a delay fatal to the patient. Malot tried half-heartedly to escape through the cell wall, but he was less plastic than a red corpuscle and couldn't quite make it at this point in the capillary. Well, there was no more time to waste. With a pair of cilia, he whipped a projectile gun from his harness, pressed a stud, and under the thrust of highly compressed argon, a crystalline needle flashed through the plasma to embed itself in the leukocyte's foamy mass. Instantly, the tiny arrow dissolved. It was extremely, but locally, toxic. The white corpuscle knotted itself into an agonized blob. Then its almost invisible membrane burst, spilling loose protoplasm into the rushing fluid. A vacuole collapsed with a faint pop. But by that time, Malot was on his way again. The faint aura became a miniature sun. His eye spots smarted even through the shields he fitted over them. Not too close. Even he couldn't take plutonium at short range. Nasty stuff. He made a quick, expert estimate of the damage. They'd want to know. The optic nerve was badly injured, but not hopelessly. He could see its pale surface right through the translucent capillary wall, itself a mass of lesions. There were drugs that would help those tissues mend. The brain was beyond his observation, but judging from the quantity and hardness of the radiation, there was some chance that the patient would suffer lifelong ataxia. Malot hoped not. He took a special grappler from his webbing, unreeling a length of metallic flexible cord, and swimming as near the fiery, sputtering mass as he dared, sent the device gliding through the luminous fluid, almost at rest here in this far outpost of the circulatory system. It needed several tries, but finally the ingenious claws made a sort of cage about the plutonium, and Malot pulled the cord tight. His plans were made. There was no time to drag the particle back by the circuitous route he had used in locating it. No, better to haul it away from the optic nerve immediately and then take the direct, shortest way out. He swam strongly, tugging at the cord, but the fragment, almost as big as he and incredibly dense, was tightly jammed. Inflammation of the capillary had closed the swollen tissue about it. With a little hiss of annoyance, Malot snatched a wheeled instrument from his webbing, made a hasty inspection of the vein wall nearest him, and went to work. A few expert slashes with a sturdy knife and a trio of holes gaped in the tough tissue. In a matter of moments, he lashed the device, a simple block and tackle unit giving a mechanical advantage of 4, in place, and threading the free end of the cord through gave a savage tug. There was the sound of ripping cells. The lacerated capillary loosed its grip, and the radioactive lump, sizzling and sparking viciously, was tumbling downstream at him. There was nothing else to do unless he wanted that red-hot mass to bowl him over. Malot dropped the cord and fled. Coldly angry, reproachful of his own blunder, he ducked down a side branch to let the plutonium grate past. He was worried. Suppose the damned thing stuck in a worse place. Ruefully, he began to trace it. Luckily, the abandoned pulley was no problem. Made of titanium alloy, it would be covered by venous tissue without causing inflammation. Good. A break at last. He found the particle firmly jammed in another capillary, a minute vessel close by. Only the plutonium's weight and irregularity had diverted it from the main stream. Otherwise, he might be chasing it through the lungs by now. Better get out of here. Taking another grappler from his web, he captured the fragment again, made a quick estimate of the situation, and with scalpels in 4 adjacent cilia, began to slice his way to the skin. The openings he made were too small to bleed. Often he managed to slip, corpuscle-like, through a slacker wall of tissue. Only his great strength and dexterity, plus the array of manipulative instruments he carried, made it possible for him to bring the plutonium along. To a man, his task would have compared with that of hauling a loaded boxcar through several miles of tropical jungle. A final slash of the keen blades, and he was out, dragging the radioactive mass after, and standing on the patient's gently heaving chest with a white fold of sterile sheet like a ghastly sky above him. The watchers saw the technician bend over with a powerful hand microscope, catch the plutonium in a bit of lead wool, and carry it triumphantly away. Beside the almost invisible specialist, waiting wearily on the patient's body, a single tiny spot of crimson welled. It was the only blood shed in the operation.